Since I launched the Deep Dive Project and began the work that I've been doing here now over 5 years ago, you have heard me discuss at length the plight of the assistant numeraries, the female-only servant class of a highly controversial Catholic organization, Opus Dei. For many, the assistant numeraries represent the most egregious example of Opus Dei's classist, sexist attitude, and I have referred to them as the organization's canaries in the Opus coal mine, because I do believe that you can infer anything that you want to know about this organization by examining how it treats the people that it considers lowest on the socioeconomic ladder. But I have never been under any illusion that the assistant numeraries are the only ones suffering, or that this is a situation that only impacts women. The truth is, all cults have a way of leaving the people who encounter or become entrapped in them worse off than they would have been if they had avoided the cult entirely. And since Opus Dei has inserted itself into nearly every sector of society, there truly are no ends to the harm it can and has caused. I think that we need to shine the brightest light possible on that, and that is why I am so pleased to bring you today's episode. For those of you who are already familiar with her work over at the Flying Kitchen, no introduction is necessary, but for those of you who have yet to meet her, no introduction feels sufficient. Shannon Vavitch is a firecracker and a force to be reckoned with. 30 years ago, she and her military intelligence husband were targeted for recruitment into Opus Dei. What unfolds feels like it should belong in a thriller novel, and the deceit, lies, and coercion that Shannon finds herself surrounded by threaten her sanity and her family's safety. But here's the thing that Opus Dei doesn't seem to understand. While it may be able to successfully wow and cow the majority of the people who encounter it into blind submission, there are those of us, like Shannon, who are profoundly underwhelmed, unimpressed, and frankly disgusted with what we have learned about this organization. And we have no problem spilling all of the tea and sharing all of the receipts to prove why we feel that way, because silence feels like complicity, and justice is a clarion call that we cannot ignore. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Shannon Vavitch, and welcome to the Deep Dive Project. Welcome, Shannon Vavitch, to the Deep Dive Project. I am so incredibly happy to have you here with me today.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
This is a conversation that I think is critically important for us to have. It's one that you have been devoting hours and hours and hours and hours of time towards. We really need to get people up to speed on what is happening within our society and within our government right now. And this isn't just in the United States either. It's happening around the world. And you, through the work that you have done and the lectures that you have given, you've laid the groundwork of some really incredible education. And so I'm excited to have you here on the Deep Dive Project today to share your perspective and your history with this organization and what has led you to doing what you're doing here today. So for those who are not familiar with you and your work over at the Flying Kitchen on YouTube, please introduce yourself and tell us about what's lit the fire under you.
Well, it all started 25 years ago. The first chapter of our story starts 25 years ago, when I had been briefly pulled into a fascist far-right Catholic cult, although I didn't know what it was at the time. And over time, I've surmised that it was Opus Dei. It was about 25 years ago, and my husband had just received orders to Quantico, Virginia, for what we call now, wait a second, what do they call it now? At the time, they called it AWS, Amphibious Warfare School.
Okay.
My husband is a retired Marine Corps colonel. And we had received orders to Northern Virginia so he could receive that specialized training. And that's what so many of these military officers do. They receive specialized trainings at universities and higher level education. So we were only going to be there for maybe 9 months. And about a month and a half after moving to Northern Virginia, I was just recovering from a painful and, really devastating miscarriage. We had one little child at the time. And I was also getting over the violent death of my brother. And so, and also really 5 years prior, my husband just deploying back to back to back. So I was really quite lost. I was really quite on my own, a new mother, very vulnerable, really wanting to be a good mother, wanting to do the right thing. And I was getting closer and closer to one of the faiths of my childhood because I grew up in an interfaith household. And so, although I always loved the Catholic Church the most for several reasons, but one of which was because we had this very dear priest who was very kind. And I just always felt really at home in the Catholic Church. So I was inching my way back to the Catholic Church, and one day, really feeling very alone, because there's something about having a toddler that really makes you more isolated than you would be otherwise. Your toddler just wants to run. You're the only, like, I was the only person who could care for her. My husband was working very hard. And um, there's a certain painful loneliness when you don't have a support network around you and you have one little toddler who just wants to run and run and run and doesn't really talk back, doesn't really you know, go and do things. They are little. Um, so I was driving by a certain parish one day, early living in this place, Stafford, Virginia, and I drove past a Catholic church, and I could see on the little marquee it said, daily mass 10 o'clock, and I thought, oh gosh, I'm going to go. I'm going to go to mass tomorrow. So the next day, I got my little daughter up, and we got ourselves ready, and we went to mass. And that very first day I walked into that parish, I was approached by two women, each with six children. And what I realize now is they were both on a recruitment mission. And I ended up literally going home that day with a woman who later became my recruiter.
Mm.
And I thought, and we hit it off so well. And I thought, God didn't forget about me after all I've been through. And especially if you are getting over trauma and you are responsible for caring for children, you are in an extra place of isolation. Because when you have a little child around, you really can't get into any deep conversation with people most of the time if you're just going to meet at the park. But if someone invites you over to their house and their house is baby proofed and your baby can just run around and they want to be your friend, you have a chance to really bond. Whereas I wouldn't have had a chance to find a friend otherwise. And I remember feeling like, and almost being in tears. I do think I cried out of joy on the way home that evening that God didn't forget about me.
Mm.
I had a friend, and not just a friend, but a whole family with adorable children. And my daughter played and played. And I just thought it was a miracle. And so, of course, as time went on, looking back, I can see what it was. It was recruitment. And I think that my story is unique in that we hear a lot about single people being pulled into Opus Dei in college campuses and into the numerary programs. But there's a family side to Opus Dei. And those networks are so tight knit and at first so welcoming and so delightful, but they very quickly become suffocating. Because at first they're just happy to see you. And then over time you realize that your clothes are being scrutinized, or something that you say might be scrutinized, or your shoes are being scrutinized. Over time, you are told things like you must spank your children. Over time, you're given parenting lessons that you don't necessarily ask for, or you ask, if you do ask for them, you're getting a kind of hardline parenting tutorial
Mm-hmm.
that you wouldn't have chosen otherwise. Now, I never used the hardline parenting techniques because I just wouldn't. But also, my little daughter was, well, she was so lovely and so delightful that I didn't want to do anything to, break her spirit because I know what happens when you do that to a child. They kind of regress into themselves. But I do remember seeing really hardline parenting approaches in those circles. And I think ultimately, after time, that is what made me truly deconstruct from the whole system. And so, yes, through that relationship, of course, my husband became friends with this woman's husband, but my husband was also being befriended and pulled in by an Opus Dei priest who was a Navy chaplain. And there's no way we could have possibly known what the deal was. All we knew is that we had friends. All we knew was that we had a community. And I was so impressed by these people and their big family. And I was so impressed by the children who were delightful. One of the first things we did, and I know this sounds crazy, but I'm just going to go ahead and say it. I don't think I've said this anywhere else before. In a system where I grew up, and my parents as well, we didn't have, and my husband's parents as well, we did not have like a safety net family. And one thing that always scared me was, what are we going to do if something ever happens to us? Who would inherit our children? Well, this system and these people pulled us in so far, so fast, that one of the first things, well, was it one of the first things? Maybe it was about 3, 4 months into it. We actually wrote these people into our will
Wow.
to adopt our children if anything ever happened to us. And of course, now that I've studied cults, and now that with hindsight looking back, and also all of the emails I get from people who have been in situations like this, I think I feel much more confident in saying that it wasn't just me. It wasn't just this isolated thing where I would think, well, that's crazy. Even now I was kind of reticent to even mention it, but no, when I reflect upon the information people have given me, when I reflect upon the information people have given me about people they know and on the things they themselves have experienced, no, that checks out. That really checks out.
It
That I'm
absolutely
thinking,
does.
yeah, this is the way to live, I felt. This is the way to live. This is after really years of me being on my own, supporting my husband's career, but after, back to back to back deployments. And I was really searching for a deep sense of community. And I found it. I mean, huge community, so many people. And they each had, many children,
Hmm.
and they had brothers and sisters and these huge families. I mean, a gathering after Mass or someone's first Holy Communion party. I mean, we're talking 100 people would be
Hmm.
pouring out of doors and into yards. And I just thought I found heaven, really. And and also the thing about these people is that they weren't necessarily fancy. One thing that I never would really tolerate is hanging around people who were very superficially in love with material items, possessions.
Hmm.
It's like, I don't want to go to your house and look at your fancy crap, I don't, and also I have a deep love for tradition. And I really wanted a large family. And I adored children. Even then, as a teenager, I was always working with children, always. And I worked with children through college too. I adored just working with children. And so I found these people who were very family orientated, where they weren't complaining about their toddler throwing an egg across the kitchen. They would laugh. They would take joy in all of these little things. There was a level of acceptance of humanity that was so beautiful. But of course, it stopped at a certain point.
And do you think that that was authentic, or do you think that that was kind of fabricated in order to like appeal to people? And so that people would want to be a part of it? Like, do you think that the families really like were this like joyful, cohesive, positive like family unit, or was that more of a facade?
Well, I think it, of course, it depends on the family. Because of course, the farther I became part of this group, the more not nice things I discovered.
Right.
And I think it was kind of the tone of the culture. It was
Good.
the tone of the culture that children are welcome. It's the tone of the culture that, no, I am bringing my baby to mass. And if my baby cries, then everyone just needs to accept that this is pro-life.
Mhm.
Babies cry. And that's one thing I think as a young mother that made me feel so much better when you are out and about in the world and your child cries, you think, "Oh no, 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 someone's going to yell at me."
Yeah.
And suddenly I'm around this group of people where children can cry and children can track dirt in the house and children can, have a fabulous time playing in the sandbox, exhaust themselves to get completely messy, and everyone thinks it's fabulous and wonderful. And what a blessing. And so there is really a raw appreciation for that kind of joy and innocence. And that really appealed to me
Of course.
because I never was, and I'm still not, the kind of mom who must keep a perfect house. I'm not the kind of mom who would ever demand my children get straight A's. I think that's really a lot of pressure on them. I'd rather them get like B's and C's and be like have friends and have fun and do something in their free time that brings them joy. And, be well-rounded and emotionally, developed
Yeah.
and empathetic. So it was that appealed to me about this community, that it was in many ways pro-life.
I also think, just to interrupt you one more time, before we move further into the story, you were talking about how they were not very materialistic, like they didn't come across
Mhm.
as being obsessed with like material stuff so much. And then you
Yeah.
mentioned how you ended up within a short period of time writing them into your will, these new friends that you'd become close with so quickly. And I have to think that the fact that they appeared to be so like unconcerned with material wealth probably made you feel even more comfortable writing them into your will, because it was like these people weren't after your money, these people weren't after your family, they were just good people who were trying to like build community and and why shouldn't you entrust your
Sure.
children to them? They're the best. That like that, I have to imagine that's kind of the feeling and thought that's going through your mind as
Oh,
you're
it's
like.
very much. Yeah. It was very much going through my mind. And when I study people like Leonard Leo, and I study how he's been able to build this community by just being this nice guy.
Mhm,
And sure, he's rich now, but he wasn't always. They have this way of appealing to people on a very like friendly, like old buddy manner.
mhm,
And also, something about Catholicism and the inner circles. I think both sides of the divide in the Catholic Church, when you're looking at the social justice side and the fascist far right, Opus Dei side, there is something about Catholicism that is very accepting. And I know this sounds like a paradox, but it is very accepting of human nature.
mhm.
And I think when they are weaponizing that to be so, and this is how I think Peter Thiel is able to be in cohesion with these people, as strange as it is. But there is an accepting for the flawed nature of people and a humility in being like, well, he's just Peter. Maybe he'll come around one day. Of course, he's, a billionaire. That helps too. But it's that kind of ease of countenance, that kind of ease of personality that I think makes these people so able to build these huge networks. There's some kind of ease to it. But
Mhm.
when it comes to, this beauty of family life that I saw, and of course I was like, sign me up, this is perfect.
Yeah.
It ends. at a certain place. And then it turns into something completely different. And what I witnessed were people who had families with young children. It is easy to be like, I love and accept my children exactly who they are when they're little, but not so much when they're not little. And what I noticed, and this is over a time span of a long time, because even though we were only in Northern Virginia for less than a year, and I did start deconstructing, although it took me about 15 years to deconstruct from that initial time. Because of course I kept after moving, we moved to the UK. We lived there for 4 years. Then we moved to Rhode Island. Then we moved to North Carolina, and then to New Orleans, and then to Pennsylvania, and then to Okinawa, Japan. About that time span is when I was just deconstructing, because we're a Marine Corps family where we were. And so we were always moving. But it wasn't just that I was moving and I was deconstructing. I was in each subsequent duty station finding this group again.
Huh.
So, interestingly, and when I look back at it from kind of like a Jane Goodall perspective, I can really look back and go, well, anthropologically, I found this same dynamic everywhere we went because I would seek it out, and I was trying to find that again. And it was the same in many ways. Of course, the families were different, but nobody was as hardcore as the first group.
Hmm.
And nobody beyond that first group was so far right. What I noticed, and this is after being inside of homeschooling groups, because I homeschooled for 11 years. I started homeschooling because my oldest is on the spectrum, but I stopped homeschooling because I realized that I had become so far pulled in that, it'll happen over time where you start to fear the outside world.
So that was going to be my next question was when did this experience that you were having go from being something that you wanted to be a part of, that you were actively seeking out at each new location that your family moved to
Mhm.
something that you wanted to get away from as quickly as possible, that you were like, kind of repulsed by? When did that shift happen, and what exactly kind of triggered that for you? And then also, because you didn't mention this earlier, at what point did you start to pick up on like the Opus Dei specific presence of it all, like the Jose Maria Escriva prayer cards and the books and all of that?
Well, the recruiters that from in Northern Virginia back 25 years ago, they had all the literature. And I remember asking her, I was like, "Are you Opus Dei?" And she wouldn't quite give me an answer.
Hmm.
And I think, they were waiting to vet us a little bit more. And I think, it could be just when you're trying to recruit a husband and wife or a whole family, there's more risk,
Yeah,
that maybe something like this would happen, that I would not get pulled in all the way, that I would go out and start talking about it.
you learned too
But
much.
yes, but so the big moment of that experience, that being pulled in to this Opus Dei community was when I was at my recruiter's house for dinner. They were always having us over. And my recruiter's brother, who's a bit of a show off, that we were, they were talking about the evils of secular society. And the conversation was always about the evils of secular society, always about the faith, the church, the history of the church. And looking back, I think, well, gosh, of course that was a cult. Who does that? You know? And it was all about being Catholic. Catholic was just like your only identity. And so they were lamenting about the evils of the secular society. And my recruiter's brother said, well, none of this is going to matter at all when we finally get a Catholic king. And I was stunned.
This was an
I was
American
abs
that said that?
Yes, an American said that. And I went, I mean, like, I had never even imagined, I had never even heard those two words together. It just never would have, like, what? I mean, I was just like, and I was stunned. And And he wasn't joking. And so my recruiter shot her brother a look like, shh, like you're not supposed to talk about that. It was too soon, obviously. I started asking questions. And because we kept getting invited over. So I'm thinking like, okay, I remember it was a few days later and like I had my little daughter on my lap and I was sitting on the floor in her living room. I'm like, so
About that Catholic king thing.
yeah, I just I remember just thinking I'm gonna because I could see the tension and I was so curious, of course. And I was very familiar with the Constitution. Because I'd studied it in depth and I was like, so what's this like Catholic king thing? I mean, just I remember just like referring to like you know, dismantling the checks and balance system of the Constitution would not be easy. And how would you possibly do that? Are you serious? And one of them said like, oh yeah, there's more going on than you know. It was more of this kind of showing off thing. And I'm like,
Oh,
and I said, so how would you possibly do that? Like, like who like and something maybe it was mentioned like it would have be voted on or something would happen democratically that would turn into theocracy or something
like
down the
people would
road.
choose it or something.
Yeah, something like that. Because clearly it's not like you can just roll up to the White House with a tank and say
Right.
we're gonna have a king now. Um, maybe you
We
could
hope not.
now, but not 25 years ago. And so they said, well, I said, well, look, if Catholics are less than 20% of the population in the United States, and I'm thinking to myself, and Catholics like you are 5% of that, I was taught in that cult that they're the only real Catholics,
Of
that any
course.
other Catholic is a fake Catholic and actually could possibly be an apostate. They said, oh, well, the plan is that we're going to team up with the evangelicals and the Mormons, and then the hapless, uneducated masses, which translates to MAGA. And it'll be God's will. We'll need a lot of God's will there. We'll need a lot of prayers to get it done. But yeah, and I was taught that we don't say "Thy democracy come, Thy will be done" in the Lord's Prayer. We say "Thy kingdom come, Thy will be done." And I was
Interesting.
also told, oh, just like stuff like, oh, democracy is not really viable. And as Catholics, we are not called to be American. We're called to be Catholic. Just all of this stuff, like all the stuff that people hated Catholics for, which I always thought was a myth. All the stuff that, it's like, no, everyone was freaked out when John F. Kennedy became president because they thought, oh no, he's going to answer to the Pope. We can't have a Catholic president. And of course, I was raised thinking, I studied that in school. I'm like, well, of course, that was ridiculous. He's an American. Well, here I was hearing it with my own ears, the very rationale that made people so wary of John F. Kennedy. They were like, no, we're Catholic, we're not American. We're Catholics first. And democracy, there's nothing about democracy in Christendom. Christendom, which I learned
Wow.
that word that means a Christian world, period, one world religion. And that the goal was one world religion,
Hmm.
Christendom, like Crusader stuff. I remember telling my husband all about it. And of course, I had a knowledge of the Constitution and the checks and balances system, but he confirmed, like, they're never going to get away with it. I mean, whatever, nice try, but okay. And then you just carry on just being friends and you don't think anything of it after a while. You think, well, that's weird. Okay. And also, we had just gone through 9/11.
Right.
We were ramping up to the troops being sent into Baghdad, which happened about a year later. Although I wasn't living there anymore, we were in the UK when the Iraq War started. And so remember, in that time, there was no possible way I could even fathom that Christians could become that militantly aggressive because after all, it was the Muslims who were doing that.
Well, and
we thought,
it's
we believed.
antithetical to Christianity on the face of it. Everything that
Right.
like theocratic fascist ideology stands for is contrasts sharply with what Christianity is supposed to stand for, which is why
Supposed to be, yeah, we conquer with love.
exactly.
We conquer with kindness, with decency. And of course, at that time, Islamophobia was sweeping through the nation.
Yeah.
And also, we also at that time, now, my husband and I never bought into this. Like, I don't know if you remember, you were little, the freedom fries. They didn't even want to call them French fries anymore.
Oh, I don't
It
remember
was,
that.
oh yeah, it's like there was such it was almost like MAGA, pre-MAGA after 9/11 because everyone was like, we are best and we're the Americans and we're not even going to call them French fries anymore. We're going to call them freedom fries.
Wow. What a moment to be
Yeah.
alive.
My husband and I still joke around about freedom fries.
Wow.
And honestly, moving to the UK, not only because I had some very good friends and very decent friends who would call me out on this kind of thinking, but I was in Cambridge. Just the education, the artifacts. I remember seeing Darwin's desk. I remember seeing Darwin's fossil collection. And in this group of people, first of all, you were never to even refer to dinosaurs. They don't like to talk about dinosaurs. Of course, evolution, you better not say that. And anyone other than their particular brand of Catholicism was a fake Catholic and an archenemy. Yeah. So, very insidious group. And while the joy of little children and the joy of parenting a group of boisterous, energetic, beautiful little children is a joy. Children grow up, and these are people who don't have the capacity or the ideology to accept their children as they grow, and they have to control them with shame.
Mm.
And ultimately, that's what kept me backing out of these groups in every subsequent place I lived. And that was the right thing to do.
I think
Yeah.
your instinct as a mother must have really kicked in, and everything in your gut was telling you like this, you got to get out of here. Like this isn't safe for your children.
Mhm.
This isn't safe for your family. And it's so good that you listened to those instincts, even, even if it meant losing something that you really valued, which was this like community and like church family and everything. Um,
Yeah.
that's a really difficult place to be, and
Yeah.
I cannot imagine just the agony of having to come to grips with the fact that something that you thought was so wholesome and good has in fact turned out to be pretty toxic. And that even became more apparent, I think, as you started to pull away and started to try to put distance, because
Yeah.
then the behavior really started to change, and that's something that
Oh, yeah.
lots of former members or just people who have been in contact with this organization have talked about. So I would love to hear you go through that experience, because I think that is where the mask really starts to come off with this organization, or at least with the people that it attracts. The mask really starts to come off when people
Yeah.
say, "I don't want to be a part of what you're selling."
Right. And we moved away. We moved to the UK in May. So I had met this family. I'd been pulled in August. And then by May, we were gone. And, the kindness was gone by then. And I still struggle with trying to understand what exactly happened. Although, in my long story, which you've watched,
Mm-hmm.
I do believe that's kind of the purest and truest interpretation of it. But when we moved to the UK, I, of course, was alone again, but with all of these really intolerant viewpoints. And looking back and looking at myself, like if I could do a brain scan of me moving to the UK after being with this family for just a few months and this entire community, and I mean, dozens of friends. If I could scan my brain upon the time when I put my feet down on the ground in the UK, and then by the time we left the UK 4 years later, I was almost a different person. thank God. But when we got to the UK, well, I mean, it's almost shameful to say, but I'll say it because people need to know. I viewed every Anglican church or every Episcopalian church, Church of England, as like the devil, like heretics. I viewed socialism, I viewed socialized medicine as the devil. They had gotten so far into my brain in that short time that I remember just thinking, oh, why did I have to move to a Protestant country? This is terrible. Why couldn't I have moved to Spain or Italy? Not even being happy that I was where I was. Because also the tone of this group, of course, joyful around children, but these are people who believe that the earth is for suffering. And based upon the fact that I was not really able to get past the trauma of my brother's death, his violent death, or my miscarriage, and I had replaced all of those pieces in me that were hollowed out by trauma with judgment of others, judgment of systems I knew nothing about, judgment of churches and histories of churches and theological structures I knew nothing about. I mean, it is truly a gift from God that I was able to get out. And I met a friend a few months. See, I was pregnant with my son at that time, and I was completely alone there. But my friend Amber was married to a Protestant scholar that I think he still teaches at Wheaton College. They're divorced now, but Wheaton College, and a theologian, a Protestant theologian. He went to Clare College. And I remember like she helped me start stepping out of that way of thinking. And so I think, was able to get out through someone really holding my hand and stepping me out kindly and gently. And I had another friend named Julia, who we're great friends to this day. And Amber was American. So I made American friends. And I had another friend named Julia. And Julia wasn't just American, she was from California. And I'm from Oregon. And I was born in California. And so we had this West Coast thing. And as you probably know, there are so many cultures even within the United States.
So many.
And so to have a West Coast friend was a treasure. You know, Amber grew up in Oklahoma. And so we were friends, but it wasn't the same as a West Coaster, a Pacific Coast friend. We had the same dialect and we had the same way of speaking. And what a blessing. And we lived down in Cambridge on the square. It's called New Square. Anyone who's in Cambridge would know. 13 New Square. It was this row house. It's like from the Dickens era. And so right in the middle of the city, these friends could stop by at any time. And they did. And they did stop by at any time. So I was able to get out of that because of friends and because of dear friends. And also, I had the grace to receive those other messages and not just be mean about it. I'd be like, yeah, you're right, But I also studied at Cambridge. I studied music. And I met people through the Catholic Church, believe it or not. And I also quickly found that the people at the church in Cambridge were not these far-right people. They were scholars, yes, but they were not these far-right people. Now, I know it's different now. There's a lot of Opus Dei in Cambridge now. I have people on the ground who send me info. But also, I feel I need to say that Opus Dei is not as ruthless in other countries as they are in the United States right now. I think there's a lot of ruthlessness in Spain in the Opus Dei communities and Italy. But I was doing some research yesterday about Opus Dei here in Germany. And the head of Opus Dei in Germany is actually saying some quite liberal things. And so like any group, there's going to be degrees. And certainly Germany has such a history. They know what happens when fascism takes over. And they have deconstructed so far. They've come so far. They're quite exemplary, actually, in their humility. So I don't think you're really going to find, you're going to find some far-right cells like AFD. As far as Opus Dei in the United States, you're dealing with a real elitist cell that has had designs to overthrow democracy as we know it and install a theocracy. And they're gonna try and gaslight you, and they're gonna be like, oh, We don't, not really. It's just, we just want a little more, we just want a little more religion. Eh, Well, that's called a theocracy. They're going to try and tell you it's some kind of spectrum with degrees, but don't buy it. Don't
Hmm.
buy it. And
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 I
they talk a lot, yeah.
oh no, you're fine. You finish your thought. I
Oh,
had
they talk a lot about we need to bring it back to the public square,
yeah.
which is just such a dumb statement. The public square. What are you talking about? They've had these little catchphrases for so long about what it is they're trying to do. And they have been singularly focused for decades. Well, they're getting their wish. And it looks like Peter Thiel is going to swoop it all up and abscond with it and
Hmm.
turn it into something
And I
very
wanted
regrettable.
and I want to talk about Peter Thiel and everyone else in that kind of
Hmm.
US Opus nexus that we've got going on here right now.
Hmm.
But before we get to that, I want to come back to what you were talking about, how when you ended up in the UK, you came over with a lot of like internalized misguided
Hmm.
beliefs about things that you really didn't have any education or knowledge of.
Right.
And I'm curious, were those beliefs that you had before coming into contact with these people, or was that something that was fostered through that quote unquote friendship?
No, not, I mean, I'm thinking there could have been threads that were just kind of teased. But no, I never would think like, oh, the world's terrible
Mm-hmm.
before. I think it was, in the 90s, homophobic speech was still in our movies.
Yeah.
It was still, people still joked about it. But no, I was never that. Oh, well, first of all, I had no opinions on church at all. I had no opinions on how people should live their lives. I certainly never occupied my mind that anyone should be telling anybody else how to live.
So it's almost like, based on what you're describing, based on like what I've seen and everything too, it's almost like these people are very good at finding people who are very idealistic,
Hmm.
very like positive, very altruistic, very willing to like devote their time towards like a good cause.
Yeah.
And then but maybe these people kind of grew up in a bubble or just have never been in these social settings or in these conversations, in these spaces and stuff. And so
Yeah.
these like ideas get planted and they kind of just take root and grow like kind of in the background, before you even realize that it's happened. And then
Yeah.
one day somebody says something and like that perspective that has been in the back growing, it like activates. And it's like, whoa, I didn't even realize that like I had these thoughts or like believed these
Right.
things, but now these words are coming out of my mouth. And I really think that that goes to show how insidious the grooming is. And I'm going to
Yeah.
call it grooming because that's what I
It
think
was
it is.
grooming.
When you target someone for a very specific reason and you aren't honest about with them about why you are encouraging this relationship, and you're planting all of these ideas that are not,
Mhm.
it's not happening via like critical discourse and like the Socratic method or anything like that. I think it's grooming, and you can groom
Yeah.
adults just like you can groom children.
Well, I was definitely groomed, and the education I was getting was, of course, bogus. These people weren't experts, but they acted like experts. And this is also what I've noticed in these circles. I get people commenting on my stuff still, um, who they really think they know what they're talking about
Yeah.
when they're trying to school me on what a theocracy is, or they're trying, I mean,
Yes.
and this is, I think, why.
I get the same people on mine too. So,
Oh, I'm sure, just little pockets of them everywhere.
and I think
But
they're
I
all
think
friends.
I'm sure many of them, well, they all travel in this collection
Hmm.
and this collective, and there's kind of like a cell. There's cells everywhere. I think that's one of the reasons why studying this topic so fervently and doing these long form deep dives that I do, it is therapy for me
Hmm.
because I've got facts and I'm like, no, this is this, this is this, this is this. And that's been very healing. because I was so wounded. You know how, like I said, I had had this trauma. First of all, childhood trauma, off the charts. My brother dies violently, really messed up relationships with my siblings, very exploited by my parents. It was just constant strife. And I wanted something better for my family. I wanted something better for my children. So when I see this family that's so beautiful and so joyful, and I find all this church group that is just so joyful, I'm like, this is the way forward. This is the way. And I think that that happens to so many people. I'm just so grateful that I had to move. I did not want to move. I'm so grateful that I had to move. I would be inflicting that on my children
And thinking that you were doing the right
because,
thing.
right. And they will tell you, I mean, because I remember asking, I don't know if I would have, but it would be pretty dangerous. It'd be pretty close. I remember asking, like, well, what if your kid's gay and don't you want to just love your child? And they'd be like, no, your job as a mother is to get your child into heaven, period. If you have to spank them, shun them, scream at them, whatever, your job is to, and that's how they believed. And they had books about it. I mean, they had literature, and there are these, parenting groups and where they all just encourage each other to just be absolutely wretched to their children. And I just could never do that. And I think that was really the first step. This was years later, in this one of these groups I was in, where I just thought, well, I'm not doing that. I guess I'm going straight to hell. That's fine. I'm glad. And that's the thing that they're trying to get you with fear of hell. Well, if you don't do this, then it's your job and you have to think about your soul. And I'm like,
Yep.
I don't. I would gladly burn in hell to save my child from that. And that's one thing that they can't, like, I really would. Like, okay, if what I'm doing is wrong, fine, I'll burn in hell. But I am not going to harm my kid. I'm just not. And so, it's one of those things where they really get you in the fear factor. It's always about
Yes.
fear. What I think I desperately needed at that time in my life, and this is where I think this translates to many people. I just wanted certainty.
Yes.
That's it. Because I just wanted something to count on, something solid. I just wanted a shared belief system with a collective that would make it so I had some kind of stability, social stability. Because after all the trauma I had been through, losing my brother, having a miscarriage, my husband being deployed back to back to back, and really no support from anywhere. I just wanted peace and stability. And so when I look at what is happening in the country right now, in the United States, there are so many people who just want peace and stability at any cost.
At any
And
cost.
that's what authoritarianism will give you.
Mhm.
And so when you're looking at a people who are collectively traumatized for whatever reason, you have a collective of people who will say, I'll gladly hand all this freedom away for peace and stability. Yeah.
That's a really important thing to point out here that I want to take a moment to acknowledge because trauma is something that has come up continuously in the work that I have done, in the interviews that I've conducted, people that I have talked to. Everyone is dealing with a tremendous amount of trauma. We are living in a deeply traumatized world. And I think the role that that plays in people's behavior, the things that they do, the causes they choose to support, the ways that they will act against their own best interests, if you consider it from the perspective of being like a trauma response or from it coming from somebody who is a very traumatized person, things make a whole lot more sense. And really, it makes this entire situation all the sadder because
Yeah.
it really humanizes the experience that we're all collectively having right now in the global society. Like it's not just the United States, it's happening everywhere. People are frightened and traumatized, and they want comfort, like you said, at any cost. And the people who are bringing that are themselves also traumatized individuals. Like I have no problem uh, saying that I think that, the leadership in my country, when they were young people, because we were all children at one time, something terrible must have happened. And, while not everyone who has a traumatized experience as a child or is abused or will go on to inflict that on other people, we do know that a certain percentage of people will. It's just a part of like human behavior. And so I really think like this entire conversation, yes, it's a political thing, it's a religious thing, it's a cultural thing, but more than anything, it's a human thing. It's a traumatic human thing. And
Yes.
that's from listening to your story, that's all that I can hear.
Well, and remember, how did I walk out of that? I had friends who cared about me enough to hold my hands, show up for me,
Yeah.
and
And that's all it took.
walk me out. Yeah. And with this is before really the internet. I mean, we had email, but it wasn't like you would be online like
All the
doing anything else but checking your email like once every few days. We were so far removed from the internet world online. That's when we would get Netflix movies in an envelope on a
Yes.
DVD, and that was brand new. I remember hearing about this. My husband came home from work one day, he's like, there's something called Netflix, and you order it and it comes in the mail, and then you watch it and then you send it back. I'm like, you do? You send it back? Oh my. Is it a hassle? I don't know. I mean, that's where we were. I mean, this was what, in 2002, 2003, 2004. We were still with each other physically. We were still kind of softening the edges on ourselves and we were all softening each other's edges because we were together in person. And that made a big difference.
Hmm.
It just did. And so, I think when you're looking at people like Leonard Leo, and in that deep dive I did just the other day, I talked about Father Arnie Padula.
Yep.
These are people who built these massive networks because they had time for each other.
Hmm.
And it works. It works. And so I think we can do that too. And that's why I think I love doing my deep dives, because people come for 3, 4 hours. And I'm so happy that they're there. And there's just something really medicinal in that connection, even if it's just online. I think what you've got in the United States for sure is a nation of a lot of really hurting people.
Hmm. I agree.
And I think it's the people who are ashamed of that hurt who are the most cruel,
Hmm.
because they don't want to admit that they're hurt. They want to scapegoat, they want to blame somebody, and that's how it works. Like when I was pulled into that cult, instead of dealing with my trauma, I was filling it with stuff. And I think, of course, now I think, well, why in the world would these people invite this young mother with one baby over to their house over and over and over again and talk about religion and Catholicism over and over and over again? I was being recruited. I was being groomed, for
Do
sure.
you think they were after you, or do you think they were after more so your husband? Or do you think they were after
Oh,
both of you for your children? Maybe.
I think they were after us both, because in Opus Dei, you work as a team,
Hmm.
really. I mean, you've never seen such close couples. They got hand-eye signals and everything. But no, it was definitely, I think, was the link to my husband. And my husband, as a young Marine Corps intelligence officer, would have been a very valuable acquisition.
And you had mentioned that he had ended up crossing paths with Opus Dei while he was in the Marines through a chaplain. which is
That was
such a
there.
if there's such, which
That
is such
was,
an interesting component of the conversation that I don't think I have ever thought of or thought to discuss is like an Opus Dei presence in the armed forces. I mean, why not? It makes perfect sense, especially because like you said, they wanted your husband. Of course, why wouldn't they be in the military? But like, I don't think I've ever heard anyone talk about that.
yeah, they're in the military. Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah. And yeah, so while I was being recruited by this woman and this family, my husband was being befriended and pulled in by an Opus Dei priest and Navy chaplain.
So this all
Yeah.
happened, you had said like 25 years ago or so. So you like lived through this experience and then kind of were just left with the experience in your memory up until a point. And I want to say from watching your lectures and everything, you said that it was last year when some of the dots started to connect and you started to realize, oh, and I would love for us to start getting into
Yeah,
that because I think
right.
that's like where so many people can come into this conversation.
Well, as far as being left with what I was left with was complete confusion for years and years, but also, I think deep down inside, a sense of failure. I couldn't figure out what had happened. I couldn't figure out what they had done. I had no way. Even now, I have a hard time going, oh my God, why would they want this young woman with one kid over at their house all the time? I mean, of course. I was left with this sense of confusion and failure. And I remember when I was close, so really the spell was broken in about 2015.
Mm-hmm.
And this was after I had basically floated around the world and then met with these other far right cells everywhere, and just been really underwhelmed and actually growing in maturity and education and my own expertise in other areas. And with a world exposure, I remember going to each of these groups thinking, wow, these women are miserable.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, these kids are miserable. Wow, this family here is really dysfunctional. Wow, this is nuts.
So it was like the
And
the bloom was off the rose at that point. It was like you could see it.
yes, exactly.
Huh.
I could see it. And I started also instinctively becoming very protective of my children, my older children especially, going, let's not hang out with that family anymore. I mean, there were some things that I could see that I was like, a lot of parentification of older children.
Mm-hmm.
And also, they would ask me, like wanting my daughter, my oldest daughter, to come like babysit for them, like for no money or
Mm-hmm.
not any money at all. And I remember there was this kind of thing where it's like they farm their children out to go work for other people for like zero wages at all
That's
or
interesting.
just pennies. And I just remember thinking, hell no. She's got stuff to do today. Maybe she just wants to stare out the damn window. But no, just because she exists does not mean she's here for you. But
Mm-hmm.
there was also a lot of expectation that I was just going to do stuff for free too. I've discovered in my contacts and the people who reach out to me, that's a common theme. A common theme. And a lot of people will be like, no, it's just a community helping each other out. It can very easily become exploitation. And so, seeing that also in the insides of these homeschooling groups, I did see a lot of kids who were getting no education at all. And that really bothered me. And also the homeschool dream was basically pitched to me where it's just like it's amazing and the kids learn more than you can believe and they're actually better off than other kids and they're so far ahead of everybody. And I bought that hook, line, and sinker
Mm-hmm.
because, of course, and I had this great instinct to protect my daughter who was on the spectrum, but at the time there were no IEPs. It was 20 years ago. It was not the same as it is now. And so we went through several years where we would buy all the curriculum and we, get all the plan in place. And I'm a very like high energy person. I have a lot of executive functioning skills. I have pretty good, time management skills. And I could see there is no way over time I could see, wait, there is no way this is going to work.
Mm-hmm.
Not with 7 kids. Okay, not even really with 5, maybe with 2, maybe. But I mean, I'm on the inside of this going, okay, what am I missing here? What am I missing here? And I realized, I just thought, well, I guess it's just me. I guess I'm just dumb. I can't pull this off. Of course, now looking back, I'm like, no, there's just a whole lot of not schooling happening.
Mm-hmm.
So I sent all my kids to school in 2015, and they were behind in a lot of subjects. They were, because it was impossible. And so when you're looking at all of this, the homeschooling groups hype each other up, and they also talk each other out of quitting. And I remember before I sent my kids to school, I thought, I'm not telling one damn person, because there is a pressure. Don't give up. You're doing the right thing. You're doing God's work. The homeschooling groups in of themselves become a cult.
Mm-hmm. I mean,
So,
that we could honestly have an entire separate standalone discussion just about like the culture of homeschooling in these like kind of more conservative circles and the stuff that goes on there. I don't really talk about this much on my podcast or anything like that, but I was homeschooled myself from
mm,
K through to when I graduated. So
mm,
I got to see a lot of the stuff that you are describing firsthand. Like homeschooling is not all created equal across the board. And unfortunately, there are a lot of cases where kids' educations suffer just because the parents are not equipped to provide the robust academic stuff that you need in order to fully educate a person. I mean, it's a tall order. So I know exactly what you're talking about there. We could
yes,
we could have an
yes.
entire separate conversation about that.
Sure, I'm up for that. That would be great. But I did feel like I got to the point where I thought, well, it's just not working for me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went ahead and put all my kids in school before any of my homeschool mom friends knew. And of course, once they did find out, it was like, oh, what have you? And I just remember
Betraying
thinking, I'm
them.
so tired of this. I'm so tired of being in this collective, like where we all have to be in each other's lives on this very intimate level. And I remember one of my favorite things about sending my kids to school was that my kids would go to school. They would get what they needed and have interactions, and I didn't have to facilitate any of them.
Mm-hmm.
And I also didn't have to like perform.
Mm-hmm.
I got a moment, and it was it was amazing. I didn't have to have any relationships in order to facilitate my child playing with another child.
There wasn't this contractual type interaction going
Yeah.
on, this like almost quid pro quo
Yes.
type of thing.
Yes, yes. And after 11 years, I just remember being so done with that, because especially if you're in a homeschooling group that is this, the Catholic homeschooling groups, I would always find you got people just crawling all over your life. I see them a lot in my comments, not these particular people, but the types,
The types. Mm-hmm.
And so, and when you look at it, of course, they're just looking for certainty too.
Yep.
And this idea that your way of life now needs to be, you're not spreading really the gospel, you're just spreading your way of life. And then it's like everyone's an MLM shiller for their own life.
Yeah, trying to build
You
their
know?
downline.
Yes, it's exhausting. Oh my gosh. So years and years of that. I was inching away from it. And I remember I had a cake business for 11 years. And that really, first of all, my work in music and my cake business were huge in getting me out of these circles, because they'll keep you busy. You'll be baking for this person, and they had this meal train where every new mom got a bunch of new meals. I mean, that'll keep you busy too. And I have some opinions about that, because a certain time I just got to the point where I'm like, I don't want your damn meals if I have a baby. Stop it. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to be on call as a personal caterer. I know a lot of people love that, but no, like what so there was a lot of that almost interdependence on, we're all doing this now. And I remember just thinking, oh, for God's sake, no,
Mm-hmm.
stop it. It was my work in my cake business and my work singing that made such a big difference to get me out of these contractual, obligatory, investments I was always being called on to make in these communities. And it was not looked upon well. in many communities that I had a cake business. I mean, like, what are you doing that for? Because it wasn't contributing to the group or these micro cults.
Mhm.
I was getting away from it slowly but surely. It took 15 years. And then
And they
I was
didn't
still
and they
very
didn't they
careful.
didn't leave you alone when you tried to disentangle yourself from them either, which is something
No.
that a lot of people have reported, this sort of like dogging and hounding you after you make it known that you don't want to be a part of it anymore.
Well, it was a constant surveillance is what I now looking back I realized I was living in a constant surveillance online
Hmm.
because we were still moving. And so I was by members of this group from back in Virginia 25 years ago. I was still being monitored. I was still being stalked. And I had one particular woman who, for whatever reason, decided to create several accounts and troll me from these other accounts.
That is like beyond the pale of just being a little bit upset that you don't want to like be a part of their club. Like that strays into another type of territory that's really, really scary.
Yeah, it really was. And she wasn't just Facebook friends with me. I mean, she was Facebook friends with my husband. So it's like, and so when did we reconnect online? Maybe 2010 when everyone got on Facebook. And she was just so nice.
Hmm.
She was always commenting on such positive things. Her name was Kathy, Kathie. And one of the first people to comment after I had my daughter, my youngest, 11 years ago. I mean, somebody like, and I would see that she would post the most wackadoo stuff on her page, really wacko stuff. But I remember just thinking, well, she's always nice to me. I guess just that's just how she feels, and that's okay, you know.
Hmm.
But also there were several other people who were keeping an eye on me. But it was Kathy who was the one who seemed to really delight in fooling me.
Hmm.
And duper's delight. I think she thought I was a witch, to be honest with you. I think she thought no, I'm serious. I think she thought she was like doing some kind of covert mission to see if I was like into black magic or something. I know that sounds
What
strange,
in the world?
but yeah, they really believe like they believe that like yoga brings in evil
Hmm.
spirits and like she would even believe that me wearing this necklace would be sacrilegious because it's not religious.
Hmm.
Do you know what I mean?
So for how long, for how many years, like from 2010 onward, was this woman and these other people kind of like hounding you or just like stalking you? How long did that go on for?
Oh, up until January.
Of this year?
Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah. That's how quickly my life's changed. I did not start doing this work until late January. It was the strangest thing. I took my daughter out for lunch for her 11th birthday in late January. You know, it was just my normal life. I was writing recipes and I started doing some activism work about a year ago, speaking out against sexual assault in medical settings
Hmm.
because something happened to me in 2017 that almost, I mean, it almost destroyed me. And I will get back to that work. But after Trump won the election, I thought I have to disappear.
Hmm.
I'm not saying anything political online because I already felt so exposed because of my advocacy work about sexual assault in medical settings, which is so interesting because I had just a fraction of the followers I do now. But when you're talking about something that happened to you, like recently, and it's
Hmm.
that harmful and painful, it just felt different working in that world. And I just thought, I'm just going to have to just like disappear, like, and just lay low for 4 years or whatever, because this scares me. Something about it made me just
Hmm.
really feel scared. I wasn't just stalked, but I was harassed. I
Right.
was targeted and really bullied so incessantly that I ended up cutting all contact in about 2010, actually, about the same time this woman, Kathy, started stalking. The synchronicities here are not coincidental, I don't think.
Hmm.
This woman, I was getting trolled a lot. Kathy decided, I guess, to go to one of her other accounts and start calling me an evil soul and a dark spirit. I was getting all kinds of insults, but there was one woman who insulted me and it felt different.
Hmm.
It hit me like a kick in the gut. And she's like, "Well, you should see her soul. Her soul is dark and evil.
What
Like,
in the world?
n- yeah, like next level. She has a dark and evil soul. And I'm like, and it was literally like medieval level, like we're gonna burn you at the stake kind of talk.
Wow.
And I wasn't really engaging with any of these people. I was just screenshotting all the shitty things they would say about me and then putting them at the top of my page and then burning them. That's what I did. I developed a new skill that day. And I actually got a lot of people like laughing and burning them with me, because they were just a bunch of big babies.
Mm-hmm.
But she went somewhere else with her comments, and I could see immediately, like, well, this one's different. So I decided to engage with this person. Her alternate account was Marina or Maria something. And I remember saying, hey, why are you saying that about me? I'm I'm a Catholic mother of seven, and if you're a Catholic, you know better than to say such horrible things about me. Vile, that's what she called my soul. Vile,
Wow.
dark and evil soul. Yeah. And I'm like, what are you talking about? There was so much uproar on my page. It was like everyone was watching this shit talking. And everyone was like, well, that one, she's like, I don't know, a woman with a weird horse picture. Is it just an angry horse? And I went, oh, I know who that is. Because Kathy was a horse woman, a horse girl. You know those people?
Yeah.
And sure enough, I was like, and it all made sense. I was like, Kathy, I know this is you. Kathy goes into full retreat. Just deletes everything. And then I find her on the Facebook or a different, because that was Instagram. I find her on Facebook. I'm like, Kathleen, Nick is not happy with you, my husband. Full retreat.
Wow.
And then that's when I was like, these damn people, I'm going to go ahead and tell their secrets because it's time. And I have a moral obligation to tell what I heard about their damn Catholic king.
Mm-hmm.
And Kathy was always so gushing over Trump. And she had a profile picture of Trump. I've used it on a lot of my content where it's like this AI image of Trump in armor
Yeah.
holding a sword
I've seen it.
with like perfectly coiffed hair. And it was
Yeah.
like 47, God bless you. And that's when I realized, because I would always wonder, why is Kathy so in love with Trump? I mean, that guy is the worst because they do see him as ordained by God. And that's when I realized, oh my gosh, they view him as their Emperor Constant. And that's what started me on this analysis. In fact, the first video where I really told the story of the Catholic king, I also told what the church militant meant. I also was able to show side by side pictures of Emperor Constantine and then this Constantinian picture of Trump.
That was
And
incredibly interesting, that analysis, side by side
yeah,
comparison that you did, because I think a lot of people, a lot of Catholics, have tend to have a very kind of like positive view of Constantine and of that period in church history, because the way the story is always spun up until that point, Christianity was really under attack and people were, forced into the catacombs to practice their religion in secret. And Constantine
yes.
was the one that like made Catholicism like acceptable and like in vogue and everything. So people, I think, have a very positive perspective of him, but clearly, like, that's a very specific viewpoint of that historical
Oh, it
experience.
is.
And I really appreciated the side by side comparison and just like the history lesson that you gave, because all of that
Yeah.
is really, really important, especially when it comes to understanding how these people are justifying the things that they're trying to do in policy and legislation and society, how they're able to convince themselves that they are actually in the right in what they're doing. It all ties back to all of this stuff that you're referring to with this kind of very narrow view. I think it's a very narrow view of Catholicism, of Christianity, and what it means to be a Christian living in the world. So
Yeah.
I think your experience 25 years ago and then on is a really important one to highlight, because I think a lot of people, like you said a little earlier on, we hear more from the former numeraries and assistant numeraries. Obviously, the servant class of Opus Dei has gotten a ton of attention, and rightly so, because of the accusations that are being leveled against Opus Dei of labor trafficking in countries like Argentina and Mexico and everything. But that does not mean, in my opinion, that your experience is necessarily rare. I think your experience represents kind of another facet of this entire thing that often goes undiscussed, just because it's not as interesting, or maybe not as scandalizing as, something like human trafficking would be, or something like that. But this attack on Catholic families, and this effort to push this very specific ideology through conservative Catholic circles has been very active and very present. I've seen it growing up in a Catholic family. I saw it in the church communities that we moved through. I see it looking back on the way that church doctrine was presented to me and the things that I heard and retained. It's all very, despite the fact that my family's not Opus Dei, all very Opus Dei coded. It's very, and that I think goes to show how successful this organization has been at infiltrating every single level of society. And your experience represents the family unit. And I think it's honestly really, really scary, because again, it's so insidious. You don't realize it's happening until you're kind of confronted with it. And then when you go to try to disentangle yourself with it, you get hit with all these flying monkeys and all of this stuff. And it's just absolute insanity. But I think 2024 was a big wake-up call for a lot of people like myself who've been doing this kind of research for a little while now. It started to connect a lot of dots, finding out about Project 2025, and people like Kevin Roberts really connected tons of dots with the research that I had been doing. And I think something similar happened with you, and the experiences that you had learning about Project 2025. You've talked about that in some of your lectures, just how you were like, oh, I recognize this ideology, I recognize this this theology. And I would love to hear you discuss a little bit that ideological underpinning that's motivating these people, the Thomism of it all and the natural law. If we could get into that a little bit, because I think it's so important.
Sure. Well, as the weeks progressed past that initial point in January, end of January, and then I started, making my posts about what I had heard. Of course, my numbers went up. People wanted to know more. And then somebody said, you really need to read that book, Opus by Gareth Gore. I had never heard of it before, and it was just published a few months before. And I thought, okay. I read the introduction and was terrified, going, oh my gosh, I was right about this. This is real.
Yep.
And this is worse than I knew. Right after I read the introduction, I made a video and I said, we're going to have a book study. Meet me on Zoom. That's where my lecture started, on Zoom, after I just read the introduction. Mm-hmm. I started a book study on that book before I had finished the book. And it was supposed to just be studying that book. And then as the weeks went by, it grew and it grew and it grew. And I'm a quick study. And also when it's like this fire in me, remember I said that fire happened and suddenly I wasn't interested in being quiet, making pies anymore. I'm like, I don't know what happened.
You got a mission.
Yes, it just went, And so I would study, I basically, those first few months, it was probably January till April. I studied almost around the clock. I've never had so little sleep in my life. And I'm even including newborns in that too. I studied around the clock. I read everything I got my hands on. And because my goal each week was to present information for the people who were joining me. Mm-hmm. Which was a blessing to me that I wasn't alone, especially after being so harmed and so abused and stalked and said my soul is vile. I had people who were kind and decent and willing to show up online with me. All of a sudden, my world changed so fast. And even though I was studying the most horrifying, scary things in the entire world, I'm growing this community. I'm making friends. I'm meeting people like you. And so it has really been quite supernatural. Mm-hmm. But every week I would learn more. And more and more. And if I had a question, so it all came very organically. And I do have an education in music. And if you study music history, you're basically getting a bare bones education in the history of the Catholic Church. Mm-hmm. So I had some kind of basis to go, oh, and sometimes I would put it in my brain, oh, that's when this piece was written, was about the time this encyclical was written. So I could hear the music in my head and go,
Yeah.
okay, that's when this pope was pope and he wrote these encyclicals. And so that was a touchstone for me. But when I came upon the Thomas Aquinas's teachings, and of course I knew about them from a peripheral
Yeah.
standpoint. But when I really started studying them and studying natural law,
Mm-hmm.
his interpretation of natural law, and it's not, and so the whole reason why now there are entire universities devoted to studying Thomas Aquinas is because Thomas Aquinas was the first person that we know of, and he was a doctor of the church, and he died when he was 47. I mean, he didn't live that long.
Mm-hmm.
He started writing things about governance, whereas before it was really just people live, they work, they die. And so as we would look at it now, as medieval as it is, and harsh, and this was not a time of civil liberties, but he was able to use the church, use the teachings of the church to go, oh, don't treat the people this way. This is wrong. Whereas in Roman times, it didn't matter. People were treated however they were treated. There's nothing you could do about it. If RAPE was a daily thing, it was a daily thing. Nobody ever was held accountable. But so this was the first time we actually had like governance and like, oh, this is wrong. Don't do this. And so in many ways, it did change the way people live to where if you're putting morality in law, then that means that RAPEing the milkmaid is wrong. And in fact, the F word, it really is an acronym
Yep.
for found to understand carnal knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
Is that how you heard it? And
It's
so,
either found to understand carnal knowledge or it's fornicating without permission under something, the king, something like that. It's, yeah.
right, right. And so suddenly there were laws that were like, this is wrong. And it wasn't like, oh, this is wrong because you've destroyed that poor girl's life. It was, this is wrong because God said you're going to go to hell for that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So it wasn't out of any truly, concern over this girl's, viewpoint or the way she sees the world. But it did give people a chance to actually not be assaulted so much. So then progress could start happening
Right.
in society, which is what got us out of there. And then of course, but they want to bring back natural law and put it in government now, not to free people from harm, but to rein them back in because people have
Yes.
just gone too wild. Swinging from chandeliers, you got guys dressing up as girls, people are this, people are that, and they can't handle it.
Mm-hmm.
And because they can't handle it, because they're from these circles, because they can't handle these things, they want to bring the hammer.
And
And so then,
they're using Thomas Aquinas's teachings and this his perspective on natural law to
mhm,
basically support their reasoning. They're saying, well, we're
exactly.
justified in doing this because see, here's all this precedent that's already been set in these like Catholic doctrines.
Mhm.
And if you are practicing Catholic, I believe, unless this has changed, you believe that Catholicism is the one true faith. So it's a
That's
foregone
it.
conclusion that you are already right. And so anything else that you can use to support that is just going to make you even more correct and just than you already were.
Right.
It practically, you could argue, puts you above reproach.
Indeed. And that's how they feel. They very much feel that way. And so they don't believe that and at this point it's become this new or post democracy way of thinking
Mm-hmm.
that they really think in order to solve all of humanity's problems, they need a strong authoritarian leader, you know, bring back deporting people, being in our country is a privilege,
Mm-hmm.
all of this kind of think of the most toxic parents you can, and that's what they want the country to be.
Mm-hmm.
And they're using really ambiguous terms like sensible.
Yeah.
We want to take things back to a more sensible time. And they say it with such disdain and such condescension. Like, we're going to be more sensible. You're just not sensible. And that is a tool of shame to
Yep.
make people think, I'm not? What am I missing here? I don't know. And so none of these people, in my opinion, are really that smart. They are just desperate for control.
Mm-hmm. Hey, that's scary because if someone's desperate, they'll do anything to
Right.
gain whatever it is that they're working for. Like they have no scruples at that point if they're acting from a place of desperation, which I think is what makes people like Peter Thiel and Kevin Roberts and Timothy Bush to an extent, although he's maybe less verbose than people like Kevin Roberts. But like you have people saying like, oh, the revolution will be bloodless if the left allows it, saying things like that are very inflammatory, I think, and really, really scary.
Oh, they enjoy it. They enjoy it. They feel that they are taking their rightful place
Mm-hmm.
as manly men leading the nation.
Yep.
Because they believe that the downfall of society, which I don't see a downfall, I don't. I really don't. I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. So what that guy wants to wear high heels, just let him live his damn life. They are really bothered that they're not more significant in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not, they want to leave a mark on the world. They're desperate for significance. But they also believe, and this is the real chilling part. Well, it's all chilling. They believe it's because of women. They believe it's because women aren't having as many babies as they should.
Mm-hmm.
Women are doing the women's work. If women were doing all the volunteer work, and making their daughters raise their families, we wouldn't have this problem.
Mm-hmm.
We wouldn't have that problem. If the women were the workforce, being the cleaners in the church, we wouldn't have that problem. They want women back in a place where they can exploit free labor for society and pop out as many kids as you possibly can. And that's for several reasons, which is so ironic. So many of them, like Kevin Roberts has 4 children.
Right.
I'm like, oh, come on, Kevin. What the hell? It's just like they are all so sanctimonious.
Yeah.
They have their grand plan, like Peter Thiel. He has his grand plan, and they really believe that without this servitude and subjugation of all women, and that's when they started calling women females
Mm-hmm.
in the rhetoric. They don't believe society will ever go forward. They cannot fathom that. And that's where you find so much hatred and vitriol towards women. And also because these men are so out of control of themselves, they're so ashamed of their base desires. One thing, I don't think I've told your viewers yet, but I have 7 children. So when I was talking about just popping out all the babies you can, and I have 7 children, and I really, really, really wanted a large family. I really, really did. And I adore all my children, and I adore like all of the family life, all of it. Um, but what they want is to manufacture this model of a woman who really, really wanted this family, which is what I wanted, and make it happen for everyone because everyone will be forced into it, whether they want it or not. That's not viable. That's not feasible. That is cruel and inhuman, not just to the woman, but to the child. Imagine. And so in these circles, when I'm talking about, the joy of family, there were a lot of women who did not want these large families, but they kept bringing children into the world because they were taught it was their duty. They were taught it was their purpose and that they were God's children and God would take care of that child, which of course we know that doesn't work.
But it sounds
And
really
that's how,
nice.
well, sure, it does in a perfect world, but that's also how you get abuse in homes,
Yep.
sibling on sibling abuse. That's also how you get people living in poverty. What the Project 2025 is trying to do is manufacture a country where people are having more babies that don't necessarily want them, but also don't have the social systems to fall back on. So I have 7 children. I wanted them dearly. But I also was in the military world, which is socialism.
Mm-hmm.
I was able to have all these babies on the military healthcare system. I didn't pay a dime. I could get them all medical care, all they needed. It was right there. We were in housing that was adequate. You know, all of these things of military life is socialism. And that's how I was able to. I mean, I don't know what we would have done if my husband wasn't in the military, But if you're not in the military and you want this large family, first of all, I mean, the hospital bills alone, I can't even imagine. And so many of these very large elite families within Opus Dei, within these far right Catholic cults, which there are many, and they've all been influenced by Opus Dei, many of these people are wealthy and they're having all these babies and they have help with their house. And I had excellent babysitters, but they have live-in nannies, they have tutors for their children, and they're in stable communities where they can have dance lessons for their daughter and they can get a ride for this kid. And they have these long relationships with people in their community that they can rely on for support. I didn't have any of that in the military world because I was moving so much. So they're trying to manufacture this model. I know how hard it is. I know how hard it is, and I really wanted this. I also know how expensive it is. So by doing this, because they really think, and you know that these are men who thought this up.
Yeah.
They really think, oh, once the woman has the baby, she'll love it. Of course she will. It is insane. And it's not going to work. And another thing they want to do is move us back to a medieval time frame where more children means more vocations for the church.
Yep.
If you have more children, then 2 or 3 can be priests.
Yep.
Right? And that's part of their plan too.
And from a certain perspective, I can understand where all of these ideas are coming from, why they are feeling the way that they are. You know, growing up in conservative Catholic circles, as I did, this is a lot of the rhetoric that we're hearing now is reminiscent of stuff that I heard growing up. Although I would say at this point, it's morphed and gone another level towards extremism than what it was at when I was growing up. I don't recognize the conservative Catholic landscape anymore. It's become very strange to me. But all of this stuff that they are promoting, you know, this return to the family and this return to like morals and all of that. I mean, it does sound very nice. It sounds very pretty. I mean, they're trying to paint a picture of a poster or an ad from the 1950s, which it wasn't reality anyway, but like that's what they're going for, and it sounds great. And what I was going to say earlier, and I kind of lost my train of thought, was just that because it all sounds so good, there's something in Project 2025 for everyone. And what I mean by that is that regardless of like if you're a conservative person, or even I would say like moderate, right of center, the Project 2025 white paper has stuff in there that I know conservative people would probably be in favor of just as a concept on its own. But the thing of it that horrified me, and what I will continue to say over and over and over again, is that it's fine for you to think of in your own opinion that like, oh, this is the way that things should be, and to conduct yourself accordingly. Like, I want to have a big family and I want to be Catholic and I want to like have this community. That's fine. But to demand that for everyone else, and then to take it a step further and not only demand it, but then not give anyone a choice, not abide by the democratic process that formed our country and has enabled us to survive as long as we have, with all of our issues, though we have them, it would tear all of that apart. And it is so incredibly un-American and undemocratic and anti-freedom that it boggles the mind how people have continued to be sucked into it to the extent that they have. And even as they are denying that it's even happening. You know, I remember having conversations with people back January, February timeframe, and they were playing apologetists for the Trump administration for things that Trump had said, and saying that, oh, I just didn't understand. I didn't have the full context of what he was talking about, or whatever. And it's like, all I have to go off of are the words that are coming out of these people's mouths and the behaviors that they are exhibiting. And based off of that alone, I can confidently say that this is not something that I want to be a part of. And I don't think that it's a good thing for our country. And even as people are denying, no, it's fine, Trump has been checking off more and more of the line items. I think now he's at like 250, 300 some out of Project 2025 that he's like signed off on or carried out, implemented in his administration in some way or another. So it's like, you got to believe your lying eyes and lying ears, because it is real. It is happening. It's happening right now in front of our faces. And people, I understand people don't want to acknowledge it because it's very scary, to realize that this is kind of all, the ball is already rolling, the snowball is accumulating as it's going down the hill. It's very, very scary. And I think that brings me to the next part of this conversation, which is, there are some very dire human rights implications here. If things are not kind of course corrected pretty soon, we're talking about people not being able to choose the kind of lives that they want to have for themselves, which is something so fundamental and basic. So what are your thoughts as we are moving forward with all of this knowledge, all of this perspective on these people? How do we move forward? How do we be the change that we want to see in the world?
Every day I ask myself, how is this going to work?
Right.
Because I've been on the insides of these circles, I know that they have held so fast to these beliefs that contraception harms women, that abortion harms women, that divorce harms family, that homosexuality is a choice, that all of these things, that kids aren't getting they're not people need to be working hard labor. They're not working hard labor anymore. All of these quick little answers of what's wrong with society these days. And sometimes I wonder, because I remember going through these trains of thought myself, because I used to be in the circles that thought, oh, abortion's terrible, it should never happen. And I remember thinking, and I don't know, I mean, was I the only one thinking, okay, but what are they going to do? Put a woman in jail? How are they going to know? How are they going to track things? How would they even know? What's the line between a miscarriage and an abortion? And I remember asking myself these questions going, oh, okay, well, that's why it's legal. As I was deconstructing, going, because you can't know, and who is going to be this grand investigative force?
And why would we want that to begin with?
Right. Well, because they want to save the babies.
I know why they do. Right.
Yeah, they don't give a crap about them after they're born. But this whole idea that, oh, we need to be a civilization that would never do that.
Mm-hmm.
We would never harm a baby, and all of this. And so they've had these pie in the sky ideals. They've been living in their delusion for so long of the way things should be, that what they have in Project 2025 is a blueprint for the way things should be, which is going to be a disaster.
Yeah.
Because people find a way.
Yeah.
People will find a way. So then what are you going to do? Are you going to make a woman give a pee test to see if she's on the pill? Then what are you going to do? Put her in jail? Then what are you going to do? Find who's dealing pills in the neighborhood? Then what are you going to do? And the truth is, and I go through this every day. How far is this going to go? Is this going to work? Because right now I'm contemplating, should I send my kids back to the United States for college?
Right.
That is on my brain every minute of the day. And when you look at the control they want over people, it's either going to happen very slowly, but even then people are going to resist. And believe me, and that the Catholic rules are very narrow, right? Very. So how are they going to know? Are they going to, check? Are you going to make sure you go to church every week? And then what if you don't? And then what? And then what? And then what? And then what? I don't think they have enough enforcers. But of course, that's where Peter Thiel comes in,
Right.
isn't it?
Yeah.
In his surveillance system. And so really it boggles the imagination to try and grasp how far they're going to get with this, how long they're going to do this, and how much destruction is going to be between here at this point and 5, 10, 15 years from now. I don't know. So what can we do? I think we need to prepare ourselves to be lifelong scholars.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm just an unlettered pie baker, right? But I've already learned a lot.
Yeah.
And that's a drive. It is a primal drive to protect my children. So in many ways, they cannot quash our nature unless they have a
Which
plan
is
for
very
that too.
ironic given how much
Yeah.
they love natural law, but they are missing this most fundamental aspect of human nature.
Right. Well, that's why they can't really come after me too much. They've tried. They've tried to be like, I bet you don't even have kids. I bet you bet. I'm like, ah. Sit down, son. They are all, and they're coming after women like crazy.
Yes.
They do. They pick us apart for every little thing.
Mm-hmm.
But that is why it is up to people who fall within the margins, who fall within the mainstream, to stand up for everybody else. Because in all accounts, from their perspective, I'm a quote good woman.
Mm-hmm.
I had all the kids. I supported my husband all this time. I'm just a pie baker. I mean, I'm speaking out, and that is a line crossed, obviously. But it is our job, those of us who fall within those margins, those of us who could walk into this next era and just live like queens,
Mm-hmm.
you know? We don't do that. We decide, and we have to make a choice. Would I hang on a wall? Yes. For my children, for anybody, yes. And that's what they haven't seen coming. That kind of fury, the kind of fury I feel, the kind of fury that, would make me turn my life around in 1 second. And I think that there are many of us who can do this, who can invest and just decide, look, for the next 50 years, for as long as I'm alive, I will fight this. And if something happens and we're finally out of the clutches of JD and Peter Thiel and Trump and all of this, then we fight to make sure it never happens again.
Mm-hmm.
And we
I
build community.
Yes, community is
Mhm.
everything. And I had somebody on, it was either on a live stream or one of my uploads, they left a comment. I had done a deep dive analysis into somebody or some aspect of Opus Dei. And they had commented and said, oh, something was like, oh, you kids, I knew all of this information 40 years ago or something like that. And I was like, yeah, I understand that, but you have to keep refreshing it. You have to keep bringing it up because, like, the lesson truly is never completely done, never completely learned. Because if you don't know your history, it's like that saying goes, you will be doomed to repeat it. And that's why
Yeah.
studying history is so critical and so incredibly important.
Right. And they're trying to change the educational system to, of
Yes.
course, wipe it out.
Yeah,
And
and
so
why
that's where
not?
we all
Because
come in.
if you can manipulate somebody from the earliest moment and indoctrinate them into a specific way of thinking, you'll have them forever. It'll be much harder for that person to break out.
Mhm. Oh, for sure. So we become educators. We become students in our own lives all the time, and we become teachers. And we are already doing that.
Hmm.
Like, so my social media, when I first started this, I had maybe 9,000, 10,000 people combined, all social medias. And now I have over 100,000. And that's just in like 4, 5 months.
Right.
So people want to know this. They're ready. Now, if I had come out a year ago saying, hey, they want a Catholic king, nobody, I mean, it would have just been like that. I
Yeah.
can't. No, come on. But it was time, and it was the right time to say it. And
Hmm.
unfortunately, a little late to the game. But when I am doing my research and I'm looking at all the people who have been saying this, people more important, people with all kinds of degrees and all kinds of ability, nobody was listening anyway, a year ago, 5 years ago. And that's very sad.
Hmm.
But I don't believe it's over. And I don't believe that the military is going to turn on the American people. I believe some in the military will. I believe those troops that they pulled in to stand around Trump at Fort Bragg were handpicked.
Hmm.
I believe they were incentivized. I believe they were given like a week of leave, case of beer, really. And they're young and they're kids. And so, yeah, you just got the most Trumper ones there. You put them all in there. You pack the stadium with, I mean, there are plenty of Trump people in the military, but not all.
Right.
And I haven't read it yet, but a scholar and writer, Tom Nichols, he just wrote an article in the Atlantic saying, "Where are all the generals?" I haven't read that yet, but it was just published yesterday. So hopefully now some people are starting to speak out, wondering where the generals are. And you and I are both scrappers. We're both scrappers. We're
We
both
are.
sitting here going, "I see this, I see this, I see this," and we're going to work our tails off.
Hmm.
There are so many well-connected, important people who could do something, and I believe they will. I believe they're just waiting till the point of no return. And I believe they're waiting until it's undeniable that they must.
Right.
And I think they're thinking if I'm going to spend the rest of my life in jail or if I'm going to die in this, it better work. That's the sense I get
Mm-hmm.
with what I know of these people.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't believe all is lost. I believe that we all need to see how bad it is
Yeah.
because we have to make sure it never happens again. Never again. I laugh at the things I used to worry about a year ago. I'm like, we all need a big shift and we're getting it. We're
We
doing it.
are. I
Yeah.
love the general message that you convey throughout all of your lectures and all of the deep dives that you've done has always been one of proactive positivity. I've heard you
Mhm.
say numerous times, like cuddle up, grab your pet, like, but we're not going to be afraid. We're not coming from a
Yeah.
place of fear. And I think that that's really, really, really important. It's important to keep emphasizing that for people because it's really easy. I think it's easy to fall into fear because that's the goal. That's the intention. Because when people
Mhm.
are afraid, they tend to lock up. It's that fight, flight, or freeze response, and then you can manipulate people a whole lot more easily when they're afraid. So this overall message of positive productivity, positive effort, and awareness and education is everything that I am
Mhm.
trying to promote here on the Deep Dive Project as well. And to your point about how your audience has grown, I think you're absolutely correct. People do want to hear this information. They do want to know the truth. People are tired of having history whitewashed and watered down. They want to know how things actually are so that they can make informed decisions in their lives. And you and I would not be able to have this conversation today unless those people were so active in pushing for better awareness. So I think
Mhm.
that that alone goes to show that all is definitely not lost. The
Right.
story is far, far from over.
Yes. And we have to think about 100 years from now. Do we want companies like Palantir ruling our daily life?
I
They
mean, I
will if we
don't.
let them.
And
Yeah.
it should be a
They
choice. Like it should be a choice for people. If you want to use this stuff, go for it, and that's fine. And the grace be upon you. But if you don't, then you shouldn't have to. Nobody should have to fall in line and toe a line that they don't believe and they don't support, especially
right.
when it flies in the face of so many foundational principles here when we're
Mhm.
talking about the United States, just with our inalienable rights and everything. It doesn't jive.
No.
So I am going to leave your social media and your YouTube and everything linked in the description of this interview. Your channel is one of the featured channels over on the Deep Dive Project's YouTube page. So
Well,
I
thank
am
you.
constantly trying to steer people over there now that I know who you are. I want people to familiarize themselves with your work because the body of media that you are creating is just growing exponentially by the week and is really, really valuable information.
Thank you.
So before we conclude here today, is
Yeah.
there anything else that you want to say or that you think would be a good thing to close out with?
I just think that freedom is always worth fighting for. And I know none of us had this planned in our lives, but I think we all know deep down inside we have it in us to do this.
Mm-hmm.
We all do. We feel it. I think we do. And what a time to be alive. So,
Truly.
yeah, be not afraid. Be not afraid. The connections we make and the friends we make along the way will make it more worthwhile by the day. And we will build rich lives and rich relationships. And in many ways, we are going to create that warmth that many of us were looking for, which is how we got pulled into a cult anyway.
Mm-hmm.
We now have a shared cause. And there's really nothing more powerful than a shared cause in humanity.
Truly.
These people have been working for this for decades. And now it's almost as if they've gotten their goal and it looks like a big disaster. And I think they feel quite silly, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
But we get a cause now. We get the pro democracy cause. And I really do hope that one day we have conventions, we all sit on a panel together. I hope one day we all meet each other in person and meet people in person. And I hope we are able to build a massive community of acceptance
Yeah.
and of true friendship and acceptance of each other's vulnerabilities,
Mm-hmm.
because that is what we need if we are going to be a force, is to accept our own vulnerabilities, accept our own weaknesses, and be kind to ourselves.
Yeah.
And so we don't have to fill any wounds with hate or judgment. We just get peace and a good conversation that lights us all up from the inside, and hope that we're going to leave the world a better place than we found it. And I just don't think, as far as humanity goes, you could ask for anything more. So we may just be on the cusp of something more spectacular than we ever planned, because we've just all risen to the occasion. And I think that's what we're going to do. And I hope I meet you one day.
Me too.
And all I want to do is give cooking lessons.
That sounds wonderful. Maybe someday we can all get together and you can give us a cooking class.
I would love that. If I could be an Ina Garten, pro-democracy Ina Garten one day, who
I
could
love
cook
it.
and give lessons in democracy and governance and the history of this and oppression, that would be a dream. I would love that. But that is what we need to do.
Mm-hmm.
Pro-democracy, pro-human rights, pro-acceptance needs to be baked into every level of our society. And no more, I think, are we even going to accept somebody who has a one-dimensional message.
Right.
I don't even think that people are going to find it palatable anymore. I don't.
Yeah.
I'm scrolling and I'm like, oh my gosh, are you talking just about shoes? Come on.
It's tired.
Give me some pro-democracy shoe talk. Bake it in,
Right.
And so that could be it, that we all have a shared purpose and we meet along those lines. It's like in music, we will all get on the same key. And then with the same key, there's nothing we can't do.
If you enjoyed this episode or found it helpful or transformative in any way, please consider giving it a thumbs up and subscribing. Another big thank you to Shannon Vavage for sharing her time with me. If you're not already subscribed to Shannon's channel or following her on social media, please consider lending her your support. I've linked everything down in the description of this episode. She is such a smart cookie, and it would probably be very good for you. If you know of someone that you think I should talk to, please feel free to send them my way. Also, remember that details to learn more about my work, connect with me on social media, or support my endeavors are all linked down below. I've recently begun publishing articles on a Substack channel called Bet Griffin and the Deep Dive Project. If you like to read, consider checking it out. Also, don't forget that in addition to YouTube, you can also find the Deep Dive Project on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Rumble. If you listen there, please be sure to leave a 5-star rating or review. It helps the Deep Dive Project reach more people. If you feel like hanging around, go check out some of the other playlists and content over on the Deep Dive Project's YouTube channel. Thank you for being here, and remember, nolite te bastardes carborundorum. Don't let the bastards drag you down.